Qualifying for the Bahrain Grand Prix is over, and it is a familiar sight on pole position as Max Verstappen takes the first pole position of the year. But it was a very interesting qualifying session, and in today's video I am going to be doing a data analysis from qualifying. If you enjoy the video, then please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now let's get straight into the video. As usual, I'm going to be talking about the top 5 teams, which is Aston Martin, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull a little bit later on, so stick around for that. Qualifying is in the books, and it was simply lovely for Max Verstappen as he took pole position, but it was definitely challenging for him as Ferrari, Alonso and George Russell in the Mercedes were both in the mix in Bahrain, and as usual in qualifying for Bahrain, it was very interesting, because there is a lot of circuit evolution from the beginning to the end of the session, and you can see that here as I bring up all of the lap times from Verstappen in qualifying. To show how much the circuit evolves, we're going to compare his first lap from Q1 to his final lap in Q3, so that we can see just how things changed. Really, in this lap, you can see how the circuit has evolved and also how the top drivers are typically using more deployment when it comes to Q3. Verstappen gains over 5 km per hour, which does make a real difference. At the downhill section in turn 6 and turn 7, you can also see that Verstappen in Q3 has a lot more confidence in his car as the track conditions have improved, and because of this he can carry a lot more speed through this section. Carrying that speed is what helped to make the difference. Also in the power sensitive sector 3, you can see how Verstappen gets both a better exit onto the back straight and also he is using more ERS deployment. The mixture of this means that he gains a massive amount of time in this section, and with all of this together, Verstappen is able to improve his lap by 0.85 seconds from the start to the end of qualifying. So we've seen how the lap times change from the beginning to the end of the session, but what about the top speed of all the teams? This is going to be very interesting because this could give us an insight into tomorrow when the drivers actually need that top speed to do some on-track overtaking. So I've brought up the top speed from each team's fastest driver on their fastest qualifying laps so that we can see who has good top speed and who might be struggling a little bit. Unsurprisingly, the top speed belonged to both Red Bull and Williams as they were both able to reach a top speed of 322 km per hour. But one team that is worryingly slow on their qualifying lap, which could potentially leave them vulnerable in the race, is Mercedes, as George Russell was only able to hit 313 km per hour on his fastest lap, which you will see shortly when I do the Mercedes part of the video. One top speed that I have mitigated because he was not the fastest in his team was Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari, but he did hit 323 km per hour on his final lap with a little bit of help from the slipstream of the car in front of him. Overall, there is not too many surprises here when it comes to top speed. In the midfield then, what teams were looking good and what teams didn't look so good in qualifying? Well, one team that struggled a bit, which I did mention yesterday, was the Alpine team. And for them, this was an absolute disastrous start to the year. Remember, they are a manufacturer team, and well, this is the 3rd year of the regulations, so it is unacceptable for them to be occupying the back row of the grid. Let's see how he managed to get there, as we are going to be comparing Esteban Ocon's fastest lap to Kevin Magnussen's qualifying lap in Q1 as he was in P15 at the end of Q1. When you look at these two times, you will see here that there is only a 1/10.5 between them, showing just how close the grid really is this year. When you compare their laps though, you can see that it is all over the place. Alpine are looking awful when it comes to the brakes, and you can see that as the delta time jumps every single time they reach a braking zones. One of the reasons for this is because the Alpine is overweight by about 10 to 15 kilos. This excess weight leads to the car being very tricky to stop. This is why Alpine doesn't really have a livery this year. They are desperate to shed any weight that they can. They also have a little bit of a lower top speed, which you would expect with them being powered by Renault. However, there is a positive when it comes to this, and that is the downforce levels. It does look like Alpine have an edge over Haas when it comes to the downforce, and you can see that as Ocon can carry more speed through turn 6 and 7. But this is the only positive for them. It is going to be a very tricky race for Alpine, and they do have to find a way to improve things very quickly, because this is not acceptable for a works team. Alpine may have struggled, but one team that looked fantastic today was Haas, as Nico Hulkenberg was able to put in an incredible qualifying lap to get himself into Q3. Let's now compare his Q2 lap to Yuki Tsunoda in the V-Carb, who will be starting in 11th. I will be using the Q2 lap from both for this comparison. When you look at these laps, you can see where V-Carb is very strong. Tsunoda is able to carry more speed through the change of direction in turns 6 and 7, similarly to how Alpine was able to have this edge over Magnussen, and it potentially shows that Haas are still lacking some downforce. But Hulkenberg does seem to be very strong on the brakes into turn 1, and also on the exit of the penultimate corner. Haas is also faster down pretty much all of the straights, which is a trait that they have carried on from the last couple of years. For me, this was good for Nico Hulkenberg, but the real test for Haas will be tomorrow when they have a full tank of fuel. We've seen them focus all of testing on long runs, and FP1 was also dedicated to long runs. And tomorrow, we will finally see if they have cured any of their tyre wear woes. I just want to say that if you are enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now though, let's get back to the video and let's talk about the top 5 teams, starting with Aston Martin. For Aston Martin, it was always going to be a tale of two halves, as Fernando Alonso made it into Q3, but Lance Stroll was out in Q2 and he will be starting the race down in 12th place. Let's compare the Q2 laps of both to see how Alonso was able to make it through, but Stroll was not. When you compare these laps, you can see that for the first half of the lap, Stroll actually had the edge over Alonso, as Alonso braked more going into turn 1. However, when it gets to the very tricky and tight turn 10, Alonso's ability takes over, and from there he carries more minimum apex speed into the corners and also gets better exits, especially on the exit of the final corner, which is where Stroll really loses out. All too often this happens for Lance. This is his 8th season in F1 now, and really there are no more excuses for him. In the race tomorrow, he has to make sure that he can somehow score some more points. Otherwise, Aston Martin will struggle to finish any higher than 5th place in the Constructors' Championship. For McLaren, today was alright at best. They are at least ahead of the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton, but that is kinda where the positives end. Their lack of top speed today was always going to be difficult. Bahrain is not a circuit that has been kind to them over the years, and that seems to still be a thing. Let's now look at the laps of Verstappen and compare that to Norris, so that we can see where the work is required. Here you can see the lack of top speed really hurt McLaren versus Verstappen. But also going into turn 8 at the bottom of the hill, you can see here that Norris has to brake earlier and harder than Verstappen, showing that McLaren is still not enjoying the slow speed at the moment. You can also see that on the exit to the first corner as well. This was an area where McLaren were weak last year, and it looks like this could still be the case this year. In the race tomorrow, it is going to be interesting to see if they can make up any ground, or if this is going to be the maximum for them in the first race. For Ferrari, today is a day of what could have been. They were and will be the closest rivals to Verstappen and Red Bull at the moment, and so much so that the fastest lap from qualifying didn't actually come from Max Verstappen, but instead it did come from Charles Leclerc in Q2. To show this, I've brought up the Q2 lap from Charles Leclerc, and we're going to compare that to the pole lap of Max Verstappen. When you look at these two laps, you can see that once again Verstappen in the Red Bull has a straight line speed edge. But what I find interesting is that going into turn 4, Leclerc was actually able to carry more speed, and that was the case at pretty much all of the stopping zones, showing that the Ferrari is strong in the braking zones and they can carry more minimum speed, meaning that they do have a good balance. Unfortunately though, for Charles Leclerc, this couldn't be replicated in Q3. For Ferrari, they are in a good position to at least get one driver on the podium. The question is though, can they maintain this pace over a race distance, or is the tyre wear going to hit them like it has done at previous points last season? For Mercedes, it was a bit of a mixed bag, as George Russell is looking like he's in a strong position, but his teammate Lewis Hamilton is starting down in P9. Let's now compare the laps of Russell to his teammate Hamilton to see how Lewis missed out. As I mentioned earlier, Russell actually had a low top speed, and you can see that here that his top speed is lower than that of his teammate Lewis Hamilton, potentially indicating that Russell has gone for a slightly higher downforce setting, and that is also the case through turns 6 and 7, that Russell is able to carry a little bit more speed in his Mercedes, maybe because he does have a little bit more downforce and a little bit more grip. Through the rest of the lap, there's actually very little to tell between the two. Going into the race, it will be very interesting to see if Mercedes still have the race pace edge that they had from last year. If so, then it's very much possible that Russell could score a podium and Hamilton can come through the field. I do think Hamilton will finish the race higher than where he's starting, but it will be a matter of how many places can he actually make up. And finally for Red Bull, it was pole position once again for Max Verstappen as he managed to fend off the competition. But that doesn't mean the season is over yet. It was a very tricky fight between himself and Ferrari and also Russell in the Mercedes. Let's now compare his Q3 lap to Charles Leclerc's Q3 lap. There's not really much difference from the Q2 lap from Charles Leclerc. The only real difference is that Leclerc loses a lot of time in turn 1, and I think this is what cost him pole position today. In the rest of the braking zones, you can see that they managed to make up time, showing again that the Ferrari is nicely balanced. But there was nothing he can do about Verstappen today. In the race, it will be interesting. I think Verstappen has the race pace edge still, and he should be able to get away from the line first. If he does this, then he should still win the race quite nicely. For his teammate Perez though, I think it will be a tough fight, but a podium is possible. Do I think he'll get it though? Well, you're just about to find out, as we're now going to be talking about my top 5 predictions for the Bahrain Grand Prix. I think in P5 it will be Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin, P4 will be Sergio Perez in the Red Bull, P3 will be Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari, P2 will be Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, and yes, that does mean that I think Max Verstappen will win the Bahrain Grand Prix. But what do you guys think? In the comment section down below, let me know. And as always, comment, leave a like, and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.